Hey, what's going on, everybody? I have James H. Williams here to talk about Mitchell Agude, Miami transfer. He covers UCLA football for the Orange County Register. What's going on, James?
Nothing much, Chris. Just with everything going on, March Madness, the NFL draft talk, and then you got the transfer portal stuff, right? Like that's been going on and still is not continuing, and we're seeing some of that here with Mitchell today, making that official. And yeah, excited to talk about Mitchell and what his future is, and what I've seen from him during my time with him at UCLA.
Yeah, and let's get into that. So, a couple game
Hmm.
or a couple seasons at UCLA,
Yep.
obviously took that jump, and you always like to see that out of any player. Just he takes that jump. 6'4", 245 is what he's listed at. Can you talk about what was the biggest strength that what did he do to make himself into the player he was last season,
Mhm.
earning the second team All Pac-12? Just kind of had that breakout year. What stood out to you with him?
Yeah, he was an interesting case. So he was kind of on my radar, just because there was last year, but the year before that was his first year, and he was a JUCO transfer. Me and him actually went to the same city college, not at the same time. I was a few years before him, but yeah. So I had my eye on him from that, and then he kind of came in as a more or less a plug and play in his first year, which was during that COVID season. If I remember, yeah, during the COVID season, and really was kind of still kind of under the radar despite his performance and the way he kind of fit in with what they were doing. And by the time you look at the end of the season, you're looking at the stats and you're like, wow, this Mitchell Agude. There was another JUCO guy that came in with him from UCLA to UCLA, and they both did pretty good. And so yeah, so the expectations were a little bit higher for him coming into this last season, and he lived up to that expectations for the most part. He was their third leading tackler, and he actually started the season really strong. He had two forced fumbles in each of the first two games, one being against Hawaii, and then that big, what felt like a primetime game, considering some of the other games I've covered for UCLA, where the Rose Bowl isn't as packed. But yeah, the big primetime game, it felt like with LSU, and on that big of a stage, you had Mitchell Agude forcing two fumbles, causing some disruption there. Like I said, he was third in tackles, and yeah, he was that guy early on. I think he was on a lot of like early risers, guys to watch early in the season. And then I don't know, if maybe because you start getting into conference play later in the season, guys are familiar with you from your prior season, or the tape is just kind of out. But they really, I don't want to say hit a quiet season, but he wasn't creating a lot more of those turnovers like he did, considering the hot start that he had. But definitely a disruptor and a playmaker. And I'm sure every team that went up against UCLA definitely had him on the radar, and we're definitely game planning against him.
And certainly, just kind of an impressive looking player again, just looking from
Hmm.
afar. Uh, and I think that's the big thing, how he'll fit in at Miami. Can you talk about his position? UCLA plays, that so you can talk about the defense they
Hmm.
play and how he fit
Yeah.
in there. And it's going to be a little bit different at UM.
Yeah, I think so. Not really knowing how much about how he'll fit into UM, but I think just looking at what he's done at Miami, or I mean at UCLA, excuse me, he was a guy who could kind of be on the line if he needed to, but he could also maybe drop back a little bit if called upon to do so. UCLA and coach or defensive coordinator Jerry Azanero, who is no longer there, but they were really good at stopping the run. They did have some trouble with the passing game, and Mitchell probably wasn't as big of a part as when it comes to dropping back and stuff in the coverage like that. But there was a huge emphasis on blitzing, getting to the ball, which was kind of in Mitchell's wheelhouse. And again, as I mentioned, when you start causing some disruption early, the way that he did, I think maybe they were putting a little bit more effort to stop Mitchell and maybe forcing some of the other guys to do a little bit more. But we didn't see a lot of those turnovers from or cause the disruption of turnovers from Mitchell. And I think a lot of that had to do with the respect for his game and his talent. But I think he was a big part of what they did. They were it kind of fluctuated throughout the season, but I know they were within that top 15, top 20 mix as far as top rushing defenses. And Mitchell and guys like Otito were a big part of that last year for the Bruins. So Mitchell would definitely be missed. I think that the biggest thing for me was at the end of the 2021 season. I'm looking, hey, is Mitchell graduated? He graduated. Did the cabin gown and all that. you're thinking he's either going to come back to UCLA or he's going to go ahead and declare for the draft. The draft, there was like 5 or 6 guys that came and declared for the draft, and you almost kind of forgot about Mitchell. And then the draft deadline passes, you still don't hear from Mitchell. And I think it's like 2 or 3 days later, he says he's coming back. And so you think, okay, good. He's going to be the guy, the leader, the figure for that defense. And then all of a sudden, like 3 days later, he's like, I'm entering the transfer portal. And there was a lot of kind of like, what really happened? What's going on? And I don't think we maybe really know the whole story, but within the day, they had announced, or it wasn't announced, but it was starting to be reported who the new defensive coordinator is. He would eventually be hired that next day. Mitchell had announced that same day that he was entering the transfer portal. So maybe what the new defensive coordinator had coming in maybe didn't fit what Mitchell was doing, or maybe what Mitchell wanted for himself going into his last year of eligibility. But Mitchell decided to move on, and I think the Bruins will take a bit of a hit because they do not have Mitchell there on that defense for this next season.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting how it all transpired. So he picks
Mm-hmm.
Miami over Oregon and Washington, also
Yeah.
considered Tennessee at one point. All interesting schools there. For Miami, they're looking at him at defensive end. They need
Mm-hmm.
there's a fit there where where they're hoping he'll obviously come in right away and play and be an impact player. Miami needs those guys. Jason Taylor, I think, is a guy that certainly
Mm-hmm.
Mitchell's excited about. A lot of guys are, and it's been fun kind of watching Jason at practice, very hands-on and not just a guy on the sideline, like just kind of seeing him give his expertise to the position. I'm sure that can be appealing to not just Mitchell, but anybody,
Yeah.
kind of looking at defensive things there. With Mitchell kind of going back, talked about, how he was when he came in.
Mm-hmm.
What do you remember, as a recruit? Like you said, he kind of went a different route. He wasn't a highly regarded recruit out of Corona there. What
Mm-hmm.
what do you kind of know maybe about his early days before UCLA?
Yeah, so his early days are actually pretty interesting, and was something I learned about once he committed to UCLA. One of our other writers at the time did a feature on him, and if you guys followed UCLA at all or watched the I guess the pregame show on Fox, when that LSU game took place and Mitchell had that breakout game, one of his bigger games was. They did a feature on him where he had a skateboarding accident in which he fell and hit his head in 2008 and went into a coma. I forgot how long he was in a coma, but things didn't look good for him at one time. And I think even when things were starting to look a little better for him, the doctors had even informed his mom that he probably wasn't going to be playing sports again. And obviously, with the way he is now, with his body and everything like that, he's been able to make a full recovery and is the stud that he is. So I think he carries that with him. And obviously, when you go through something like that, it will change your mindset and your mentality and the way you approach things. And football was no different for him. And I think that is something that he leans on. And I think even in his Instagram bio, which he's obviously changed a little bit because, he did have RCC to UCLA in there, which was the JUCO, and then the football program he was with. But he said, I think it's something along the lines of, I fell into a coma and woke up a gem or something along those lines. So obviously that's something that he still carries to him and is a part of who he is and what he sees for himself. Obviously, I think another thing for me that I took away from some of the stories that I've heard about him and just from talking about him is, one, he's very well spoken and kind of knows what he wants, and he's diving into some different NIL deals and some virtual reality stuff that I find to be pretty interesting. But I think his mom still goes to I can't remember what country, but will go out to a different country and kind of donate her time and some different resources to other parts of the country or other countries in need. And that was a big thing for Mitchell. I think he would still volunteer maybe during the off season whenever he can, but I think whenever he's done with college ball and maybe even whenever he's done with whatever NFL career looks like for him, I think that's something that he looks to do more of, is kind of getting out and helping those in need. And again, those are some of the things that stood out to me about Mitchell off the field. And I can definitely see that as kind of what motivates him to kind of move forward. So yeah, we just in this area alone, he Coronas in Riverside County, we had some other a former teammate of Lonzo Ball out here. They went to high school, and one of them was also in a skateboarding accident, and he hit his head the same way, and unfortunately passed away. So I'm sure Mitchell was aware of that story. And again, we look at someone else in the area who wasn't as lucky in terms of an accident like that. I think those are the kind of things that motivate Mitchell to kind of be the person that he is. Really quick, just to kind of touch on some of what you said there with Jason Taylor and some of the other guys. At first, I was thinking, man, like you're getting UCLA was getting this defensive coordinator coming in who has some NFL experience, was a defensive coordinator before, I believe, at Boston College. They just got Ken Norton Jr. coming, who was the defensive coordinator for the Seahawks and the Raiders. And obviously, Mitchell had already left before Ken Norton Jr. came in, but you start thinking about the NFL talent and you're like, man, why would he leave? But you look at Miami and it makes sense. And you see some of the photos from his visit or the videos on Instagram where he was doing all these different photo shoots or poses with some of the former NFL guys that I guess are on staff or they're in the building. And even before it was official, you're kind of like, yeah, I think he's going to Miami. So it's not a shock after you see that. And as you mentioned, just what Miami has to offer over there with Mario Cristobal, I think says a lot. And obviously, Mitchell Agude performed at least twice against Cristobal because Cristobal was at Oregon. I think Mitchell had one of his better games, I think, in his first season against Oregon on the road at Oregon. They were without their starting quarterback. That defense was asked to step up, and Mitchell had 2 forced fumbles then and a sack, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. But he's performed pretty well against Cristobal before, and I'm sure Cristobal was more than happy to have him aboard.
And he touched on a lot of stuff there and great insight on kind of his background. And that's certainly a great to know. And I think a lot of fans can appreciate you sharing that. There's a couple things out before we wrap this up. The forced fumbles stand out to me, and fumble recoveries, kind of just happen but forced fumbles is such a big stat, I feel like, for a defensive player. And I think sometimes it goes even overlooked because of interceptions or sacks even, but forced fumbles, you're bringing a lot there to a team. And I assume he's a guy that has a knack for that. And also he's probably making hard hits and big plays when he's not, causing fumbles too. What do you think about his attributes there and what enables him to have that success there? I think it's 5 or 6 just there in those 2 seasons.
Yeah, just in the 2 seasons, like I said. So I think he had 4 forced fumbles this last year. I think he had 2 against Arizona that I was actually mentioning when I was referring to that stat line. And I think he had 1 forced fumble against Oregon. But I think, again, as I mentioned with Cristobal being front and center to see what Mitchell can do, Mitchell was able to strip the ball out of the hands. I believe it was either the quarterback or the running back, someone in the backfield for Oregon. And he was able to strip the ball, and one of the defensive backs was able to pick that up and run it in for a touch, for a pick six, not a pick six, but a scoop and score. And, I think when you're able to not only cause that kind of disruption, but, allow for your defense to then turn that into points all in the same play, especially when you're without your starting quarterback and UCLA is, there's more pressure than ever on that defense to try and make some plays. I think, that it can only mean good things for Mitchell. And again, you start looking, he was getting these forced fumbles early this season. You're like, wow, is this going to continue? We started breaking out the record book a little bit early just to see, like, where is he at? Like, I mean, 4 forced fumbles, first 2 games. Is this going to be the new norm for him? Are we going to see this every game? Obviously that ended up not being the case, but it put it on at least my mind very early that at any point in time, Mitchell could, and if, if the opportunity presented himself, was going to try and get the forced fumble. And I think that goes to show you where his mentality is. Obviously he's trying to bring guys down. Like I said, he had 54 tackles and led, or was third in that defense in terms of total tackles, but he's a guy who isn't afraid to put his hand in there and make sure he's trying to strip the ball out. And he has that let's create a turnover first mentality. And I think, that can only mean good things for Mitchell and maybe what he's doing there with Miami. He did have 2 sacks and he did have 6.5 tackles for a loss. So he's a guy who has no problem getting into the backfield, putting some pressure on the quarterback, putting some pressure, and again, creating turnovers and causing havoc. And I think that's what you get from a guy like Mitchell, who, again, I just talked about his experience, at an early age. And I think he he has that in his mind that, he feels he's playing on borrowed time or unexpected time. And, he just plays freely and he's just playing and having fun and just, causing havoc all at the same time.
James, when we first started this, you
Hmm.
talked about how you were excited, very curious to see how he was going to do in
Yeah.
2021 based on what you
Hmm.
saw the year before. Different situation, different coaches, the whole thing. A lot of
Hmm.
adjustments will need to be made, obviously.
Yeah.
But where do you see his future? Either at moving forward, where do you kind of see him as his trajectory kind of continues? Or maybe what's something? Is there an area that you think that maybe needs to either tune up or refine even more as he
Hmm.
becomes, just gaining more experience in his career?
Yeah, it would be hard to say what he needs to improve on. Obviously, I think if maybe and again it depends where they see him. Maybe when he goes to the NFL level, I think he does have a chance to get on an NFL team and potentially be drafted. Obviously, it's a little early to start throwing out what round he'll land in or what day, but I think maybe they see him at a linebacker or something at the next level, and maybe he's going to have to work on his coverage and dropping back and whatnot. But I think if he's on the line and especially at the college game, I think right away he's going to be an impact player for that defense for Miami. I'm not comparing him to Jalen Phillips, but I think if you want to look at that and say, hey, a guy who's from very close to the same area in terms of high school, went to UCLA, made the jump to Miami. Hey, and you look at what Jalen Phillips is doing now, still out there in Miami with the Dolphins. If Mitchell can do a lot of what Jalen was able to do, I think they would be pretty impressed with that. But no, I think the thing for me, especially like if I had to put an expectation on him, not really putting out numbers, but I would expect Mitchell to do well. Again, I look at what you see a guy coming from the JUCO and Riverside City College and what he's able to do as an impact guy right away at UCLA and without missing a beat, and then going on and just furthering that next step forward in his second year and building upon his stats and whatnot. I think he'll maybe take some time to adjust, but I think by the time the season rolls around, I think he'll be good to go. But I think in terms of how he'll fit in, that remains to be seen. But again, I think he does have an NFL future. I think that's his mindset right now. And obviously, you're not making a move to go to a place like Miami where you have Mario Cristobal, Jason Taylor, and a bunch of other alumni like that can get their hands on Mitchell Agude and really kind of get him ready for that next level. I think that's what you're getting out of a lot of guys. And we've had a lot of guys come through the transfer portal into UCLA. Over the past 2 seasons while Mitchell's been there. So I think he's been able to see some of the other guys come into UCLA from different programs and have success. And I think maybe there was some communication there with some of those guys that he was able to build bonds and friendships with, and maybe use that to say, hey, maybe if I did kind of go out, find what I want, find the place for me, maybe that has that NFL talent, that level talent for me to kind of learn from. I think that might have played in it for Mitchell. I'm not sure. I haven't even matched up what his major is and how maybe he's trying to go, obviously going for his master's or something. But I think what he's going to be able to do at Miami will be big for how he develops going forward into an NFL career.
Yeah, just great stuff, man. I appreciate you
Mhm.
taking the time to do
No
this.
worries.
The rundown, a lot of insight here, a lot
Mhm.
of great stuff here. So, James, take care, man, and we'll talk to you later.
Hey, Chris, thanks again for having me. And I'm looking forward to your coverage and seeing how Mitchell does and reading all about it.